This morning on the Ag Issues program, a pleasure as always to bring on to the program Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us in studio this morning. Roger, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Greg. Good to be with you.
Well, and I think you and I were just joking that with that snow flying in Iowa, and expected to stick as well.
Yeah, I'm glad I drove back from Iowa yesterday and not today, because I'd run into some heavy snow, it looks like, between Des Moines and Kansas City.
Man, oh man. All right, let's get to it. We got a lot to talk about here. And this has to do with one of the bills that Governor Kelly signed yesterday, the substitute for House Bill 2595, establishing the Attorney Training Program for Rural Kansas Act to encourage and expand opportunities and incentives for licensed attorneys and Kansas law students, that is, to practice in rural areas. But it also establishes the Attorney Loan Repayment Program for rural Kansas. And this is an issue, Roger, I know it's near and dear to your heart, but of the fact that how long you have been working on this issue as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was directed. That's kind of the mandate from the president of Washburn, which I report directly to, as well as the dean. When I came at the start of 2016, it was to work on this and hopefully get something done on this, because we've had a problem for quite some time, not just in Kansas, but also in the Plains states and in the West. And in fact, was coming up two summers ago, I devoted the whole month of June to a series of programs on RFD TV highlighting the problem. So we did about 6 or 7 minutes every week. It was consecutive Mondays, and those are all posted on my website, and you can find those also on YouTube on the rural attorney shortage issue. And we also featured some CPAs from across the country that have the problem on the CPA side. This is not just a rural attorney problem, it's a rural CPA, and often rural attorneys and CPAs work together on problems. So we've got it on both sides of the aisle. But Kansas has seen a steady migration of legal talent toward the urban centers. Now, we don't have too many of those in Kansas, but that'd be Wichita, Topeka, the Kansas City metro area. And we've got roughly 80% of Kansas attorneys concentrated in just 6 of the 105 Kansas counties. So that'd be Douglas, Johnson, Sedgwick, Shawnee, Wyandotte, and Riley County. And so that's left many of the 105 counties with dwindling number of attorneys. And in some rural counties, there are fewer than 3 practicing attorneys. And many of those are going to age out. So they're nearing retirement. And for a rural attorney, retirement is not a simple thing. You can't just walk away, Greg, because your clients are going to show up on your doorstep. So you have to transition into this, and you have to have a pool of qualified and prepared young talent to take over for those older attorneys that retire, because they're retiring with a wealth of knowledge. And that knowledge base has to be built up. They need to be prepared for this coming out of law school. And so there's not a huge lead-up time. There always is a build-up time. Of course, one of the things that I occasionally say on the seminar trail is that for our law students, they graduate and they get into a firm and they're handed the building plans for a house, and all they know how to do is put 4 nails in a 2x4. So there's a long learning curve, and we got to get better at that. And that means more tailored classes for them and more hands-on approach to the way we teach at the law school. But just in the past 3 years, Greg, the number of rural attorneys in Kansas has dropped by another 5%. So we were already low in the tank. And just in the last 3 years, that number has gone down by another 5%. And we have 2 Kansas counties that have 0 practicing attorneys. And so that's not just a problem for farmers and ranchers. That's a problem for criminal defense, public defenders. They have to be imported from out of that county into that area to handle those issues. That's a constitutional issue right there. And about 31 counties have less than 4 attorneys per 1,000 residents. And so that's the problem just in Kansas. And so that creates a knowledge gap where the experts required to handle land transfers and ag taxation, for example, are miles away. They're overbooked. I tell you, Greg, I could spend every waking moment and every sleeping moment servicing people that have questions and clients and not stop for the foreseeable future. It's just incredible. In fact, I taught class yesterday until 4:45. I come home. I had I traveled in the morning, so I'm backed up on my emails, and I got to them last night. And there's another 26 emails, interesting questions. One was a bull that was stolen. I've got a corporate liquidation. I've got a question as to whether mineral interests are like kind to a fee simple interest in real estate. And the list goes on. And there are water questions in there, all types of other things. So there's a tremendous need that's out there. Now, I do say, and I wrote a piece on this yesterday after the governor signed the law and I got out of class, and this problem has been brewing for a long time. And actually, as I say in the piece, law schools have contributed to the problem because for decades, law schools have subtly, and I would say sometimes overtly, steered students away from what I would call a Main Street practice. One of the problems there, I think many listeners have heard about the Newsweek rankings of law schools. Mm-hmm. Well, these national law school rankings historically have placed a high premium on what we call big law placement and starting salaries. And so for the law schools to climb the rankings, which is important to them, then career service offices, the placement offices in law schools, often have prioritized relationships with the larger urban firms because those firms will, if they can get students placed with those firms, that's going to boost the school's median starting salary stats far more than a solo practitioner in a rural county. And also modern, and I would put that in quotes, modern legal education has increasingly moved toward narrow specialization. But just as I gave you a sample of just some of the questions I had last night, Greg, for rural clients, we operate as a legal Swiss Army knife. You got to do everything. You've got to do a bit of everything from a boundary dispute maybe in the morning to a complex farm estate tax issue in the afternoon. And so for many years, this generalist path, although it's highly specialized, you've got to have a high degree of knowledge and expertise, but in a whole bunch of areas. So we would call that the generalist path has, by the law schools, been falsely framed as less intellectually rigorous than specialized urban practice. And that's not true at all. For example, agriculture has become much more technologically advanced than when I started my career a little over 30 years ago, almost 35 years ago. And I just wrote a piece for my blog on intellectual property issues on the transition of a farm. You know, you transition a farm to the next generation, and now we've got to worry about, well, who owns the data associated with that farming operation. That's not something that we've had to deal with in the past. That's another issue that's out there. So that gets you into highly technical intellectual property issues for that farm out in, let's say, Gove County, Kansas. And so it's a big issue. And I mentioned that the many of the rural attorneys that are out there are over age 60. They're going to age out at some point in time. And in several counties, the fewer than 3 attorneys mentioned that I mentioned a moment ago are often semi-retired. So that means their capacity to take on complex multi-year agricultural litigation or intensive estate restructuring is extremely limited. And so you've got to have lawyers, but you've got to have specialized lawyers that understand the industry of agriculture. It's a big business. You got to understand the industry of agriculture, the nuances associated with it, and be able to speak the language of the IRS, the language of agriculture, and help clients with these highly technical and nuanced issues.
The ability, and as you put it very much uniquely, the bilingual ability to speak both those languages of the IRS and agricultural law, because of the fact that, it's 2 completely different languages, too.
Yeah, it is. And it wasn't too long ago, I had a fellow professor at the law school that came up to me and he said, you know, Roger, you're the only one in this building that has street cred. And what he meant by that was you're the only one that can talk to attorneys, legislators, people in the Congress, people in the federal agencies, and farmers and ranchers. And that's something I've been blessed with to develop that skill over the years. But there's a disconnect there. We need more people like that. And I try to emphasize that to my students, particularly at the law school, is you need to be a good communicator. You need to be able to work with clients. You need to understand their language, understand farm terms. And I give them several pages at the beginning of the semester of farm terminology in case you're not familiar with it, if you didn't grow up in that background. And then if you get out there in a rural area and you're not familiar with agriculture, spend a day with your clients. Spend a couple days. Go out on the farm and see what they do. See all the complex decisions they have to make on a daily basis, from economics to risk management to the legal issues, the tax issues. Understand their business, and that will build a rapport with them and the respect from them that you need to represent them competently.
Because let's face it, going out to rural areas, what is the main number one, number two, and number three jobs? It's agriculture.
That's right.
Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, is joining us and talking about Governor Kelly signing substitute for House Bill 2595, establishing the Attorney Training Program for Rural Kansas Act, and also establishes the Attorney Loan Repayment Program for rural Kansas. So, Roger, let's get into the bill as far as what are some of the primary mechanisms as you see it for this bill itself.
Well, I think there's 3 or 4 of these. One, let me just kind of go through these quickly. The first one is a $3,000 law student stipend. That's what we would call the early commitment. And so you've got a mechanism here that is trying to influence law students before they sign contracts with large urban firms during their second or third year of law school. And that's restricted to students that are currently enrolled at either KU or Washburn law schools. And that stipend can be for up to 3 years. Now, it can be applied to tuition, fees, books, or other school-related expenses that they incur while pursuing their law degree. But to remain in compliance, they have to begin practicing in a rural Kansas county within 90 days of being admitted to the state bar. Now, that money is received during law school, but the service clock, I would use that phrase, doesn't start until after graduation. So they have to, as I said, they have to begin full-time practice in a rural Kansas county within 90 days of being admitted to the bar. And also, for every year a student that accepts a stipend, they commit to 1 year of rural practice. So if they take the stipend for all 3 years of law school, they owe the state 3 years of service in a designated county. So it's a form of a conditional debt. It's only fully forgiven once the student completes a year of rural service for every year they receive the stipend. So it's basically a work for equity agreement. You work it off, and that's an agreement between the student and the state of Kansas. Now, the money is paid out during law school, but again, they have to work that off. So the way that's going to function is at the moment the student receives that stipend check, the state of Kansas records it as a loan, and it only transforms into a gift in the form of forgiven debt once the service is rendered. And if they would fail to meet the requirements, for example, they decide to take a job in Wichita or Kansas City, then instead of the rural area, which is the condition of the debt, then that condition's been breached, and so the student would have to repay every cent of that stipend money received. And that's not just principal; they'd have to pay back the principal plus interest. Then that's defined in the statute as prime rate of interest plus 2%. And running from the date of the breach. Now, the student generally only has 90 days to pay the state back in full once they're found to be in breach. And so that's a pretty rigid structure, Greg. Those tax dollars that are funding this are effectively buying legal years for rural communities. And what we're trying to do here is provide peace of mind to farm families that the young attorney moving into town isn't just there for a summer internship, that they have a financial commitment to stay in that area and build a practice for at least as long as the state supports their education. The other part of this is what I call the retention engine. This is the loan repayment. This is the heavy lifter of the bill, and this is designed to offset the large amount of debt that many students have that when they come out of law school that supposedly is forcing them into what I would again say supposedly higher paying city jobs, although that's not true. You can make more in a rural area when you factor in that your cost of living is going to be less than you can in an urban area. The maximum annual benefit here is up to $20,000 per year. That's paid directly toward the attorney's outstanding student loans. And then under the Act, rural is explicitly defined as any county in Kansas except those 5 most populous counties, Douglas, Johnson, Sedgwick, Shawnee, and Wyandotte. So that's going to open up 100 of the 105 counties for placement. And the attorney has to be actively engaged in the practice of law, which includes private practice, serving as a county attorney, or acting as a local government counsel. And this has got a 5-year cap on it. So it's $20,000 a year for loan forgiveness for 5 years. So it's $20,000, $100,000 over 5 years. That's the ceiling. So this is the incentive that is structured to last for 5 years. And the research suggests that that's the tipping point for where a professional becomes fully integrated into a community. The other thing that's going on here, 5 years, one of the drawbacks to practice in a rural area for a lot of students, if they don't have a spouse, is that the pool of possibilities is smaller in a rural area. So this 5 years, hopefully, if they're looking for a spouse, they can also find a spouse and put roots down in those rural areas and stay there. So the goal is by the time that the attorney reaches the $100,000 cap, they've established a home, established a family, built a client base of local farmers and businesses, and are far more likely to stay long-term than somebody just starting out. And this whole bill has a sunset provision on it. It's going to run for 5 years, so this is a test. You've got a built-in expiration date, a sunset date, and so before the 2031, July 1st, 2031 deadline, legislature is going to evaluate whether the legal deserts have shrunk and whether this is working or not. So we'll see what happens. And this is run through the Commerce Committee. You've got a dedicated fund established in the state treasury to house the stipends and the loan repayment monies, and then an advisory committee, including representatives from the Kansas Bar Association, Kansas Supreme Court. The 2 law schools in the state are going to oversee the application process. So it's a start. I think it's a good start out of the gate here, and we'll see where it goes, Greg.
And there's still some legwork. Or I'll let you describe it more. How much legwork is yet to go as far as getting all the steps leading into this?
Well, yeah, they've got the administrative path has to be set up on this one, and get that fund established. And I think it's going to be available for the 2026 graduates. This all starts July 1 of this year. And so the $3,000 amount will be there. The $20,000 amount will be there. They have to apply for it, be reviewed, those types of things, and then meet the requirements of it. So the administrative, there's always going to be bugs in the works, so to speak, and hopefully they'll get those worked out pretty quickly. But this goes through Commerce because this is designed as a rural development issue. And rural opportunity zones, for example, rural development, that's all handled by the Commerce Committee. So that's the appropriate committee to run this through, not the Judiciary Committee. So I think they've got it in the Department of Commerce. That's going to be good, and we'll see how this gets set up and established, and if they can get it out the gate operating smoothly pretty soon. By the way, they can go to your blog to read just some of the things that we were talking about here. Right. All of those details are there. Later this morning, it'll be posted on, also cross-posted on Ag Manager at K-State, and also RFD TV. Might have a blog on RFD TV. Okay, sounds good. Roger, as always, thanks, and we'll talk to you next Monday. Thank you, Greg. That is Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us on the Ag Issues program here on 580 WIBW.